Well, we won't try to rewrite everything we put in our newsletter last night. I will say that we appreciate the fact that Peter McLaughlin agreed to come on to defend his stance on the HERC facilities, re-permitting the HERC. So we'll give him a chance to lay out his case today. But for the record, the county and the corporations involved really do have the supreme advantage of money and publicity if they need it. So anyway, as the climate heats up once again around the wisdom of allowing the Hennepin County Energy Recovery Center, or HERC as it's colloquially known, also is the downtown Minneapolis garbage burner, to up its garbage burning capacity by 20% over its currently permitted limit. The advocates from every corner, the state legislature, the MPCA, the Hennepin County, Covanta Energy, which is the contractor operator of the generator, Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, and several citizen commissions and advocates are again active and staking out recalcitrant positions for and against both the facility itself and its application for increased burning. The heat comes from totally unrelated arguments, according to the same project.
Is Hennepin County's and Covanta's waste-to-energy facility, or the HERC, better at reducing the city and the county's wastes by not dumping them in landfills the way we as a society have done for centuries? Probably. The United States remains one of the very few industrial nations which still landfills nearly 70% of its waste, while some European nations actually reuse and recycle up to 70% of theirs, some of them almost down to zero landfilling. But the questions don't stop there. Just what are they burning in those furnaces, and what byproducts of that burning are adversely affecting human health? And after the burning, what's left in the ash, and where should the ash go? If any or all of these things are as toxic as the burning facility's critics say they are, and they might be since it requires a pollution control agency permit to run the place, we know the deadly mercury, lead, cadmium, hydrochloric acid, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and a couple of other pollutants are emitted in some quantity at the burner.
Some friends of the HERC insist that the WTE facility has reduced those toxic emissions by massive percentages, and that the waste should be dumped in landfills, if not burned. So its opponents absolutely insist that this is not so, while also saying that any burning of anything whatsoever is far too detrimental to the public health and adding exponentially to the greenhouse gases responsible for climate change. This is hardly a partisan issue, since supporters of both the HERC and its opponents reside in both parties and across the political spectrum.
Helping to feed the latest controversy was a MinnPost Community Voices column submitted by well-known Minnesota science writer, filmmaker, and novelist Sean Lawrence Otto, whose bio states that he lives in a wind-powered, passive solar, super insulated geothermal home he designed and built with his own hands. He recycles, composts, and drives a hybrid car. In his piece, he plumps for the waste to energy as at least the current answer to landfilling garbage. Is it? Or would it detract from putting resources in reuse and recycling, as opponents of HERC insist?
So, should the Hennepin County garbage burner operator Covanta Energy be allowed to increase its burning volume by almost 20%? Current permits allow Hennepin County and Covanta to incinerate 1,000 tons of Minneapolis and near-ring suburban garbage at the Hennepin County Resource Center. Should it be allowed to burn 212 tons more per day the maximum the plant could handle?
Hennepin County states that every year the HERC plant burns about 365,000 tons of garbage, or about 1,000 tons per day, to provide enough electricity for 25,000 homes each year. That's about 15% of all 162,352 households in Minneapolis. And in all of Hennepin County, over 300,000 households are single-family dwellings. The electricity HERC generates is sold to Xcel Energy, and Covanta calls it renewable.
Well, let's stop there and bring in our guests to lay out their cases for and against this ongoing saga.
Yes, and meanwhile, you can join the conversation as well by calling us at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980. You can also tweet us at TTT Andy Driscoll, or post your comments and questions on Truth to Tell's Facebook page. That's facebook.com/TruthToTell. And we'll get to as many questions and comments as we can during the hour, but don't waste any time. Get in now.
Get the call in now. And not only that, but we are down to one line, I'm afraid, because we do have two guests on the phone today instead of one we expected. State Representative Frank Hornstein is back with us. He's a DFLer from South Minneapolis who's been working against this whole HERC idea for quite some time. Among other committees, he's on the House Energy Policy Committee, as well as the Ways and Means Committee. And on the side, he chairs the Transportation Committee. That's not here nor there today, but hey, there you go. He holds a master's degree in urban environmental policy. How are you, Representative Hornstein? I should call you Frank. We're friends, right? Man.
Wonderful to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you.
And we also have with us Hennepin County Commissioner Peter McLaughlin. He chairs the Public Works, Energy, and Environment Committee and is a member of the county's Solid Waste Management Coordinating Board. And Peter's been with us several times talking transportation, but he's here supporting HERC's permit appeal. Commissioner, welcome back to you.
Glad to be here.
Do you still chair the Railroad Authority?
I do. I chair the Rail Authority and the 5 counties Transit Improvement Board that invests the sales tax that the legislature put in place.
And you sleep when?
Oh, I get enough sleep. I do.
All right. Laura Norkus-Crampton is back with us this year, a long-time anti-HERC advocate. She's a registered nurse, a public health nurse, and a former member of the Minneapolis Planning Commission, which rejected at one time Covanta's request to burn more garbage. Although she resigned from that body, we can ask you why in a minute. I've almost forgotten about why. She was recently presented with the Minnesota Nurses Association 2012 Betty Sjogren Health and Safety Award. Congratulations to you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Norkus-Crampton, welcome to you.
Thank you.
All right.
And we also have with us on the phone Alan Mueller.
Mueller.
Mueller?
I think Mueller is.
Who's an outspoken...
I think in Germany they pronounce it Mueller. Mueller. All right. Go ahead.
Alan is an outspoken anti-burning and environmental integrity advocate, described by one writer as one who takes no prisoners. He's executive director of Green Delaware, from where he hails, but now resides in Red Wing, Minnesota. Welcome to you, Alan.
It's always a pleasure to come on your show.
Thank you very much, Alan. Good to have you. And to really fill our roster today, we have on the phone with us Justin Leibenholtzel, one of the area's really greenest activists, now late of the Southeast Como group, Como Green Village, which he founded, and he also co-founded the Southeast Como Solar Pilot Project, and the now defunded, I think they called it MIMO or something, Move In, Move Out, waste reduction program, which we could hear a little bit more about. Justin, welcome back to TTT. Are you there?
Do we have Justin?
Do we have Justin on the phone?
Okay, well, we'll try to get Justin. But for right now, As always, we do want to hear your questions and comments, so please do call us at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980 to get your questions and comments live on the air. You can also tweet them at TTT Andy Driscoll or post them on Truth to Tell's Facebook page, facebook.com/TruthToTell.
That's one word. And okay, so this you got a lot of voices coming at you, and we'll try to keep track of them and remind you of who's on the air a little more regularly these days. I have been brought up short by not mentioning who our guests are more frequently, and I will do that. It will not mean that we're leading necessarily to a break when I do that. Okay, Peter McLaughlin, go ahead. Would you please lay out the case for why the public should support this burner and the increased capacity that you're seeking?
Sure. We have a mountain, a massive mountain of garbage in Hennepin County.
All right.
1.5 million tons per year of garbage get generated in Hennepin County.
Yeah.
That's over.
It's a whole separate show that talks about that.
Yeah, maybe we should.
That's over a ton a person.
Okay. So,
Man, woman, and child.
Okay, yeah.
So there's this massive pile of garbage. You're correct that historically we threw it in landfills, and we've been cleaning up landfills in this state for decades.
yeah, covering them over. And
We have one in Eden Prairie right now that they're talking about trying to, clean up, put a liner in because it leaks into the Minnesota River.
Do you know how long they've been talking about that?
Well, and it might not have enough money right now to get cleaned up. So it's absurd.
It is.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
And so we need to find a way to manage it in the real world. And the HERC is a part of the system. It's a small part of the system for dealing with this waste in Hennepin County.
Okay.
We're talking about less than a quarter of the waste in Hennepin County is actually handled now at the HERC. More of the waste is handled through recycling. And so it's a part of that system. And what we're asking for is to deal with that small increase. And we're talking about an increase right now of, it's actually 11%. That's the physical amount that we can actually increase it. The permit application says 20.
All right.
That's an artifact of the regulatory process. But in fact, we can increase the throughput, and we're requesting to increase the throughput by 11% in reality.
So 11%, is that because of the technical limitations?
Yeah, you have to shut it.
system?
You shut the system down a couple times a year to clean it and do other things, do maintenance. And so, in fact, the physical limitation of the increase that we're asking for is 11%. That's less than. It's 2.6% of all the garbage in Hennepin County. So this is, to me, this is almost a sideshow. Okay, it's this tiny fraction, 2.6% of all the garbage in Hennepin County. And what we really need to be doing is getting on with the big mountain of garbage. There's 150,000 tons of garbage that were landfilled from Hennepin County last year. That's a travesty. That's a travesty.
Then why not work on recycling and reuse?
And in fact, we are. We are. Our new solid waste plan calls for increasing the goals for recycling. We're working in Minneapolis. They've now gone to the single sort. I've got my single sort bin now, and the places where it's been tested, actually we funded some of the tests of the single sort that got the city to move. We actually had to put in.
When you say single sort, you mean instead of having to separate everything out and
instead of having the most complicated system in the Western Hemisphere for recycling, which we had, which really was a deterrent. They're not. The city of Minneapolis is going to the one sort system, which is where you put all the recycling into one bin.
Oh, one bin.
I cannot tell you how excited I am about that.
Thank you. You're not alone, and the numbers are showing that we're getting a huge increase in recycling. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
We actually had to almost compel Minneapolis. In our new policy, we said if they didn't go to something simple and straightforward and get their numbers up on recycling, we were going to start taking funding away from them for recycling because they were resisting this best practice.
We have to interrupt for just a second to let people know that Minneapolis actually collects the garbage in Minneapolis, does it not? And in St. Paul, we have all private contractors doing that work.
Yes, they collect the garbage and the recycling.
Right.
Okay.
So for our St. Paul listeners, don't call the city because we don't pick up garbage over there anymore. And our recycling is still separated at least into 2 or 3 different things. All right, so go ahead.
The fact is, the biggest city in our county was in the bottom quarter in terms of its recycling rate. And our new policy pushed the city of Minneapolis, and now they've adopted this single sort, and it's showing results. We supported that move, not only with policy, but we actually funded the pilot studies that were done in Minneapolis that allowed them to make this necessary move, this smart move. But we actually funded those. We funded the Linden Hills composting project. We're funding the Network for Better Futures. They're pulling plastic out of the waste stream. We've got Project for Pride in Living. They're disassembling mattresses, old mattresses, to get the wood out, to get the springs out, to get whatever you call the fabric on the outside.
Who's doing this?
Project for Pride in Living. They're using people who need PPL. They need people who needed jobs. It's part of their training program, and we're actually using our some of our solid waste funds to fund these activities to reduce and recycle more in the waste stream. So I think we've been very aggressive, in fact, in doing these things. We've set up a fund for innovation that the network and PPL can use on an annual basis over a 3-year period to try to come up with new innovative strategies to reduce segments of the waste stream.
So getting back to increasing the trash burning, though, I mean, are we getting to a point where do you see this as just something to handle the mountain of trash in the interim until we can build up these other methods of waste disposal and reuse and recycling, or is this something that we could see continue to grow, and every couple of years we're like, oh, we should probably increase this again? I mean, I think that's the big question.
I think that's a fair question, and our goals are to actually reduce the fraction of waste to energy, to increase the amount that we do in recycling and composting. Look, Andy, there's 150,000 tons a year that's landfilled now. There's 90,000 tons of garbage that go up to Elk River, driven all the way up to Elk River, polluting, these semis polluting as they go up 94. Yeah. Okay, and what they do there is they turn it into refuse-derived fuel, and they burn it in an electric plant up there. What we can do is that's 90,000 tons. We're only asking for 40,000 tons a year in expansion.
Okay.
So we've got 240,000 tons of garbage that is either going to a landfill or up to Elk River. And we can reduce that with recycling, with composting, with this just 40,000 ton expansion.
Okay, Peter. So, but there is a question of economics here as well, because you do make money by burning this stuff as a county. There's an energy payback in terms of Covanta's waste to energy thing, right?
There in fact is, and there are electric lights here in the studio.
Right.
It produces electricity.
Yeah, well,
it produces heat.
But that's a revenue stream for you in a way?
And the $1 million is not general fund revenue. It's revenue that goes into our solid waste fund that funds the PPL activities, the network activities. It funds composting. It funds all these things.
I just want to remind everybody that you're listening to Truth to Tell, and today we're talking about the HERC burner in downtown Minneapolis that is burning garbage, and it wants to, Covanta operates it along with Hennepin County, and they want to boost, they want to be permitted to boost to capacity, right up to capacity, 20% more, but Peter McLaughlin, who's one of our guests today, says just more like 11%. We also have Laura Norkus-Crampton, Representative Frank Hornstein, Alan Muller, and I don't know if Justin Ivanholz is back yet or not. All right, so we're without Justin today, and that may be a boy. So we're gonna take a quick break here, come back, and now we'll open it up for the people who have some concerns about what you've just said, Peter, and let's see what they have to say, and we'll have a conversation. How's that? All right, we'll be right back. Now back to our conversation about the HERC garbage burner. Once again, Commissioner Peter McLaughlin of Hennepin County, Laura Norkus-Crampton, one of the HERC burner's opponents, Alan Muller on the phone, and in the studio with us also, Representative Frank Hornstein, who's on the Energy Policy Committee of the House of Representatives. Okay, we got to start with Laura. Do you want to? I know you've been sort of immersed in this like a swimming pool of, of information.
It's been a long haul. It's been a really long haul. I've never heard of, I've sat on the Planning Commission for almost 4 years, and we did have conditional use permits that came before us that either didn't meet the requirements or went on appeal. I've never heard of an appeal lasting 4 years. So this is really unprecedented, because usually if there's an application that's come before the Planning Commission, they appeal our decision, and they don't have the data to prove that they should have been able to get their appeal granted, then usually the city decides to send them back and say, look, start over when you're ready. And I mean, that's lasted a month, that's lasted a few months. I've never heard of a 4-year appeal. So that's...
Well, what does that say about it, though?
You know, I guess I don't know what to say about that, except what I'd like to focus on right now are the actual findings and the reasons that we actually denied the appeal. And so our job...
When you say we?
The Planning Commission. And so the Planning Commission, for conditional use permits, there are required findings. These are state statute that any conditional use permit must meet.
And what we have to tell the people is that conditional use permits are sort of deviations from the standard rules and regulations of a city's zoning code.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you very much for that. And so what happens is an area, a site is zoned for a certain kind of use. And so an applicant might say, the property owner might come forward and say, well, we'd like to use it for something outside of the zoning, but how about if we do it if we can meet these certain conditions? And the city will allow that if the conditions are met. And so the two conditions that we found very troubling, when this first came before the city, there was very little data presented to us at all. I mean, basically it said, you know, this is probably, it's going to meet the standards, it'll be fine, it's something we've been doing for a while, don't worry about it. And to give the Planning Commission a lot of credit, including Carla Bates, who's on the school board, David Motzenbecker, who was a president, a lot of people who really took our job seriously said, well, look, we need some data to see if this actually meets the findings or not.
In fact, the Planning Commission is made up of really representatives from several parts of local government, including the county and the school board and the park board and all that jazz. Okay, go
exactly.
ahead.
And so our job is to speak for the citizens and to try to be a citizen oversight board. And so, you know, that is our duty and that's our due diligence. So the finding that we found that the two findings that we thought that this capacity increase would not meet will not endanger or be a detriment to the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare.
All right.
Now, if you Google incinerators and mercury, it's a major source of mercury. If you look up dioxins, HERC was the #1 source of dioxins in the state in 2002. These are the PCA's own numbers.
So what's wrong with dioxins?
Well, what
are they?
They are the dioxins we're talking about here are more the Agent Orange type stuff. They're very they're endocrine disruptors. They're some of the most toxic substances known. I mean, these are very, very serious toxins that you certainly don't want just dispersed out into the environment.
Is this the stuff that we used to find buried in barrels around the country? All kinds. They started to call those. They started to refer to those as dioxins, and they were
Well, the research
polluting.
the research that I did myself on it, some of the scientific studies said that they don't know of a level of exposure low enough dioxins that don't cause cellular changes, which is like precancer or whatever. These are very, very serious things. Linda Birnbaum, if you check out a YouTube video, she has like a 15-minute lecture on it, and she could tell you the whole list of how bad that is. The other finding that we found is will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity and will not impede the normal or orderly development and improvement of surrounding property for uses permitted in the district. So what we basically thought is like, well, if you have these emissions, these regular shower of emissions landing on other neighborhoods, and the only data that was really presented to us was a 2007, and it was an EIS done around the new Twin Stadium. Yeah. And basically, it seemed to be talking, which wasn't really germane to what we were talking about, but it was a study and it was data, and I guess they thought they should present something. So basically it said, don't worry about the HERC's impact on the new stadium because the emissions will go over the stadium and land elsewhere.
So here's the thing. We want to make it nice and clear for our audience. You're talking about a lot of process stuff here, but there's also the plume from the actual burning that contains a variety of chemicals, some of which are really not very healthy for us, like mercury and cadmium and this kind of stuff. And let me quickly ask Peter to respond to a little bit of that, and then we'll ask Frank to jump in with his perspective.
Well, on the procedural side, one of the reasons this has taken so long is that there have been new data requests, and we've been responding to those. And the PCA has asked for new information. They have new modeling requirements, and we've been dealing with that. You know, most of these conditional use permits are about a development. The developer wants to do something, and so they go away. We continue to operate, and we still.
It's like sort of like putting a college in a residential neighborhood. Essentially, is what most conditional use permits speak to.
There's a St. Paul example.
Well, we have a lot of those.
On the other side, though, the question of pollutants. This, number one, the alternative of landfills is terribly destructive, and we've seen that. The landfilling alternative is clearly worse.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it's really important to respond to that argument. We've heard now for 35 years this is
Frank Ornstein.
Thank you, Andy. This is better than a landfill. I would argue that landfills and incinerators are both awful. And what we have when you build an incinerator is this is burning 1,000 tons of waste per day. 300 tons of that ends up in a landfill. It's the ash. And in the combustion process, all of these toxins that Laura was talking about get concentrated into the ash. So you have less to landfill, but it's more hazardous. So now you have a hazardous material that's going to be landfilled anyway. You know, the Supreme Court, and I think it was in 1994, hardly a liberal environmentalist, Justin Anton Scalia, writing for the majority. There was this went all the way up to the Supreme Court to decide what's the nature of this ash. And so even the Supreme Court found that this has the characteristics of a hazardous waste. And so it's even sent to a special landfill because this is so toxic and so dangerous. And so
it can't be mixed in with the organic stuff.
The idea that we're somehow solving a landfill problem by creating a different kind of more dangerous landfill is really a misnomer.
And is there like a half-life of 500 years or something like that around the ash?
Anytime you put something in the ground, it's a problem. And this is actually far more expensive to manage. Now, I'm not a defender of waste landfilling. The problem with both landfilling and incineration, you have manifold environmental issues. But the problem with it is that half of the waste, according to Hennepin County's own data, is very easily recyclable or compostable materials. We're talking about office paper. We're talking about newspaper. We're talking about cardboard. We're talking about food waste and organics.
Right.
And so the problem here is that we have had this facility operating for almost 25 years, just under 25 years, and we haven't had an appreciable increase in recycling, and half of what goes in there are these recyclable materials. And so while there's a lot of rhetoric around increasing recycling, we just haven't seen that. And I can comment. I know Alan Muller wants to get in, and we want to hear from him. But this is the problem. We have hazardous ash. We have horrible air toxics problems, and half of what we're burning and landfilling is recyclable.
If after 25 years, why aren't we recycling?
Let's talk about why? Because more. Right. Well, it kind of flattened out. We kind of stalled out on that. The fact of the matter is, when your biggest city is in the bottom quarter in recycling rates, that's a problem, and we forced the city of Minneapolis to change.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, the business community, which businesses produce over half of the solid waste. Okay, over half, and that effort has been, frankly, moribund for a long time, and
trying to get the business people to recycle,
to more actively recycle.
Okay.
Right? It's tough, And Frank doesn't have the votes in the legislature. I don't have the votes on the county board to compel, say, large generators of organics to have to compost those things. We ought to do that.
Is paper considered organic, by the way?
Well, office paper, newspaper, these are very part and parcel of what we recycle. If you have soiled papers, pizza boxes, napkins, things like that, that can be safely composted.
But what I would also say is that what we were told by the recycling people is that the largest source of dioxins coming from the burner is incinerating white paper. Now that tells you everything that's wrong with this whole approach.
Because white paper has bleach in it and things like that?
It's what they use to process it. But, why aren't we recycling the white paper rather than turning it into more dioxins?
Why
that
aren't we,
actually
Peter?
comes from the incineration process. But what I will say is that we just need to, rather than burning more recyclables, we need to recycle more recyclables. That's a very simple proposition.
I agree with that, and that's what's in our plan. That's why we're working with the Solid Waste Management Coordinating Board. We did a PR campaign with Channel 11, where they went through their offices and talked about how they could do more recycling there. We're reaching out. We have a resolution this week to do a business, to try to revive some extra additional effort for businesses. We've got an apartment building recycling effort. Apartments have been tougher to get higher recycling rates in, and so we've got those things in place. The fact is, though, the Linden Hills composting operation, the city of Minneapolis head of solid waste said, for a free composting, you get your own bin, the whole business, they're getting less than 50% participation. And so, we're trying, okay?
Well, it is hard to get everybody to recycle. No question about that.
And so we're trying. We're trying to make efforts on the margins to improve.
Let me jump in here and first we have a phone call, and then Alan Muller we got to get him in. He's on the phone from Red Wing. So, but anyway, we have a phone call?
No, we don't have a phone call. We actually have a comment on Facebook coming from Scott Travis, and actually, Peter, this was mostly for you, and you are tagged in it. So maybe so that we can get to Alan, I'll just tell you, you've got a comment directly directed at you from Scott Travis on Facebook, and he's wanting to know more about plasma recycling and how you feel about upgrading the HERC.
Is that medical? That's that medical stuff?
Plasma conversion technology, and I know we don't have a lot of time to get into it. It seems like it's the kind of thing that could
maybe
be a whole other show.
Geez, I wonder if Pam will let us go for another hour.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that comment, and maybe you and Scott can talk that out on Facebook.
It sounds a little technical for this show right now.
So let's bring in Alan.
Alan Muller, what do you're chomping at the bit. I know you are. Would you please comment on everything you've heard, and why can't we burn anything? Why shouldn't we burn anything?
We shouldn't burn everything, and I would argue, and I have been following this incineration game for a long time.
Are you on a speakerphone?
No.
Okay, just get a little closer.
Okay now?
Yeah. Well, it's a little better. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
That is much better right there. Yeah. Go ahead.
Incinerators are a horrible way of managing garbage. Always have been. Always will be. But incinerators are a very good way of separating people from their money. And if you really want to understand what's going on with garbage incineration in Metro, The way to understand it is to look at all the hidden fees and surcharges that are coming out of people's pockets and going into the hands of the burner people. I would argue that that's the bottom line. But let me segue over to another small point. Peter's been talking about how Hennepin County is trying to recycle more. There's a state body that produces a report called the SCORE report, and it has details on what different counties in Minnesota are doing. And I looked at those numbers a couple of years ago, and I'm looking at them now. Hennepin County had quote-unquote solid waste revenues of $9.7 million, and it reported spending $1.2 million on recycling. And, even if you factor in all of the other things, such as quote-unquote education, Hennepin County for that year spent 12% of its solid waste revenues on recycling, and almost all of the remaining amount on disposal. And that's the bottom line. The reason that recycling rates are mediocre in Hennepin County and dreadful in Minneapolis is because that hasn't been the priority. And the only time it becomes a priority is when somebody wants to burn more, and then we start hearing a lot of deceptive rhetoric about recycling.
Okay, so we have some responses that we can get from Peter. One of the things, it seems to me, is that this is a question of marketing. So how do you market a little bit better to the average individuals and the businesses, and maybe even get some regulatory stuff going to get them to recycle?
Well, I think that's really...
The way you do it, Andy, is very simple. You set hard goals, and then you develop a plan to meet those goals.
Yes.
And, you can look around the world at communities that are demonstrating 70, 80% diversion and recycling rates.
We do know that about Europe, yes.
And San Francisco.
And
San Francisco, okay.
And other places.
Why can't we follow that model?
Very good question.
Well, we can.
Peter,
I don't have the votes. I mean, half the...
Why don't you have the votes?
Why don't I have the votes? Because they're, just as Frank doesn't have the votes to keep the SCORE money in the... to fight, to be invested in recycling and composting. Almost 80% of the SCORE money is going to the general fund. That's money that was supposed to be for solid waste. But I don't have the votes to say, for example, all businesses that are large generators of compostable materials must compost. I don't have the... I tried, and I couldn't get 4 votes on our county board as part of our plan. That is the reality. Frank runs into that at the Capitol all the time.
Frank?
Well, I think Alan makes a very good point about there's so much political capital and economic capital that's going into disposal versus recycling and composting that it is very hard, I think, politically to move this. But the public is with us. And I wanted to just quickly comment, this composting program in my community that Peter referred to, it's very successful. And this was done at the initiative of a group of citizens concerned about global warming.
Oh, you're talking about the Linden Hills thing.
The leadership didn't come from the city or the county or the state or the private sector. A group of citizens that's interested in doing something about global warming. And so this is why we have a 50% participation rate with very little resources, completely voluntary, initiated by citizens. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do. People are hungry for this. They're very excited about the single source. This composting, we're doing 70-75% in Linden Hills right now. There's no reason why people can't, the people that are participating.
It's interesting,
there's no reason we can't do that countywide, and that's what the State Climate Change Advisory report.
And where can they find that?
75% recycling composting should be the goal.
75%.
I agree that this can be, that we can do more, and we're going to do more. We agree that we got to get more composting and more recycling. This is, again, this expansion is less than 3% of the garbage. It's not going to take away from the impetus. There's no evidence that it takes away from the impetus to do recycling and composting. The fact of the matter is, this is virtually without any cost, and in fact, it'll produce revenues that we can use for composting and recycling.
But the point from the conditional use permit standard
Norkus-Crampton
is that it's millions of pounds of things being burned that don't have to be burned, that could be recycled, that get turned into toxic toxic emissions, and it starts getting spewed on other people's neighborhoods, and all these underserved neighborhoods that get so much of the predominant ash plume and emissions plume, if the figures that we saw were correct, and the studies are still not through, the PCA is still, going to be submitting their final report at the end of the summer, but there just isn't any reason for people to have to breathe any more of these emissions. There isn't any reason for any more of this toxic ash to be created when we could be doing so much more with recycling and composting.
Could we continue this at the end, like at the end of the summer when that report comes out?
That'd be great.
I'd like to get you all back and talk about this then, because we must end it there. And I'm sorry to say that's the fastest hour even I have spent. And I have said that a few times on the air, but it is one of the fastest half
We
hour.
ought to be phasing this out rather than expanding it, I think, if we're going to get to recycling.
Yeah, that's what it
Exactly.
sounds like. It sounds like it's a phasing out
It's a
thing.
transitional deal.
All
But
right.
the fact of this tiny increase
Yeah.
in this is not going to be an impediment to the long-term phasing.
And
It
so
locks,
we're-
it locks us into burning
Well,
No, it
again.
doesn't. No, it doesn't.
All right, quickly, Alan. I'm sorry sorry you
if I
didn't get
could
much.
throw- if I could just throw out a final thought in the form of a question to Peter. For the last 3.5 years since this increase was proposed or demanded, the county and Covanta have been resisting doing an environmental impact statement, which would give us a deeper look at the alternatives and the health impacts of burning more garbage.
Well, why?
And I want to challenge to Peter to justify, if everything is really so good and your case is so sound, why are you dodging the bullet on having an environmental impact?
We're already late again, but quickly, Peter. Why not an EIS?
Essentially, all of the information that an EIS would require is being prepared now.
Yeah, I don't trust EISs anymore anyway.
Well, it's not an analysis of alternatives, which in this case is a very potent point, because
Thank you all so much. This has been
Yeah.
great. State Representative Frank Hornstein,
Hennepin County Commissioner Peter McLaughlin.
Laura
thank you.
Norkus-Crampton, Alan Muller. We thank you all once again. What is the next step that citizens can get involved with?
the city council, the buck stops with the city council, regardless of what the PCA says. It is the city council that has to decide on this appeal whether or not this application can meet the findings.
Okay, so once again, this is no time to let just activists
Exactly.
do the work as citizens. It's your duty and responsibility out there to voice your concerns. Call your ward council member, your mayor, talk to your county board member, and even your state rep with your position on the future of our
State senator.
and your state senators. Yes, but well, that's what I mean by state reps. They're all involved, but only you can affect the change you seek. Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
Once more next week, we bring together the single-payer people, Senator John Marty, Michael Milligan, Healthcare for All Minnesota Director Aaron Anderson for their annual meeting. Again, tune in Wednesday night at 7, live from Duluth, UMD.
And Truth to Tell is a co-production of Civic Media Minnesota and KFAI. Links to audio and video of all of our past shows are up on Truth to Tell's own website, truthtotell.org.
And Kel Heil engineer today. We had Peter Hansen and Mark Kerner and a bunch of folks running around here helping us all out, and we thank them all.
Yes, and we'll be here Wednesday night at 7 from Duluth, live for another edition of Truth to Tell, and it'll be our Community Connection series. Until then, I'm Michelle Alimoradi.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. See you then. And remember, please do take care of each other.